The wind had already died down by the time they found it, but the smoke hung there thin, sour, just above the trees like something not ready to let go. Fire crews were still sweeping the ridge, clearing hot spots when one of them stopped and called down into the ravine. There was a vehicle at the bottom, crumpled, burnt. And when they pulled the door open, what they found inside had been missing for 10 years. Not both of them, just my dad. The passenger seat was empty. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. I'm Aiden Holden. I'm 34 now. I live just outside Sacramento, work in inventory logistics. Nothing flashy. But I used to be from a town you probably haven't heard of unless you've hiked through Yosemite's northwest edge. Back then, life was well normal. School weekend baseball, grilled cheese on Fridays. My dad was steady, a forestry tech who took his job seriously. My little sister Clara was 6 the last time I saw her. It was the kind of family that didn't make the news. The kind where summer meant mosquito bites and gas station ice cream, and where you knew what drawer the batteries were in. Nothing dramatic, no dark secrets. And maybe that's why what happened hit as hard as it did, because you don't see a storm coming when the sky looks clear. We were living just outside Oakhurst when it happened. I was 14, and like most 14-year-olds, I thought I knew everything. Clara, on the other hand, she was still in that stage where everything was magic. Leaves were fairy wings, pine cones were treasure, and if you stood still long enough, butterflies would land on your hand. Dad had planned a quick overnight hike with her, just the two of them. Said it'd be good for her before school started back up. He asked if I wanted to come. I didn't even look up from my game, just muttered something about camping being lame. He gave me that quiet nod like he understood, but maybe he didn't. That was the last time I saw either of them. They were supposed to be back by the next day. But the day came and went. Then 2. Then 4, and eventually all the maps, all the dogs, all the helicopters, they stopped. The official report called it presumed drowning or loss due to exposure. That's how they put it. Nice and clean. I carried that silence for a decade. Buried it, honestly. There's only so many ways to reread an old missing person flyer before your brain starts blocking out the details to survive. I stopped going back to the park, stopped answering questions from the few who still remembered, and eventually the world did what it always does. It moved on. Until last week. A wildfire swept through a restricted zone near Lost Arrow Basin. Dry lightning, mid-level containment. Nothing that would have made national news. But then, a fire crew found something. Down in a ravine. A vehicle, or what was left of one. When the news hit my feet, I didn't breathe. The plate, the make, the model. It was Dad's SUV. 10 years gone, just sitting at the bottom of that drop like the mountain had been keeping it quiet. They showed a grainy photo on the local segment that night. I don't even remember getting up, but the next thing I knew, I had my jacket in my hands and my keys in the ignition. Yosemite was 5 hours away. I got there in 4. And that was when I realized the wreck wasn't the only thing the fire had uncovered. Something else was about to surface. Something no one was ready for. The ranger station looked exactly the same as I remembered: aged wood siding, a sagging porch rail, and the same faded map nailed to the corkboard beside the door. Mason Burke came out before I even knocked. He looked older than the last time I saw him, gray at the temples, a little slower moving down the steps. But the way he stood, the way he scanned the tree line before turning to me, told me the land still lived in his bones. "You're Nathan's boy," he said, holding out a hand. I shook it. I saw the report. I came as soon as I could. He didn't ask why. Just nodded like he'd expected me to show up eventually. Inside, nothing had changed. Same maps on the wall, same filing cabinets that never closed all the way. and the same kind of stale air that clung to government buildings too close to wilderness. Mason pulled out a chair for me, then sat across the table and laid it out. Your father's SUV was found at the bottom of a ravine half a mile north of Lost Arrow Basin, he said. One body inside, male. We've confirmed it's Nathan. I didn't say anything right away, just nodded once slow. I think I already knew before I got in the car. But then Mason added, what the public doesn't know yet is, the fire didn't kill him. The wreckage burned this week, but that car went over years ago, and it wasn't pushed. He let the weight of that sit. It was driven off, deliberately. I stared at him for a long second. With Clara inside, there was no trace of a second person, he said. Seat was empty. No bones, no teeth, no remains. Just him. Later that afternoon, he showed me the topographic map they'd used back during the original search. I still remembered its sections marked in red pins, clustered in spirals the places they gave up on first. I pointed to a spot just east of the ridge. This is where they were supposed to camp, right? Mason nodded. That's where the permit placed them, near a seasonal stream bed. But the SUV was found up here? I said, moving my finger half a mile north across terrain no one would drive by accident. Why would he leave the trail with Clara in the car? Mason hesitated. Back then, we thought it was the storm. Heavy rain that night, washed out several paths. We assumed he got turned around, lost cell signal, maybe tried to get them out another way. But now we know it wasn't an accident, I said. That theory doesn't fit anymore. Mason didn't argue. He just looked tired. Down by the crash site, the air still smelled faintly of scorched pine. Most of the vehicle had been hauled away, but you could still see the blackened outline where the soil had burned hot where brush used to be. A technician from forensics was still on site, crouched near the ash line. She showed me where the soil dipped where drag marks ran up the incline away from the wreck. Clara was small, I said. If she got thrown clear, there'd be evidence, she said gently but firm. This area burned hard but not to the bone. If there were remains, we'd have found them. She pointed to the path where the pink surveyor's tape fluttered against a low branch. Someone moved through here deliberately, and they weren't running downhill. They were climbing. Back at the lodge that night, I spread out the old case file on the desk. Weather logs, call records, hand-drawn grids. The last time I saw it, I was 17 and angry, trying to file FOIA requests to anyone who'd listen. I remembered the conclusion they'd written, presumed drowned or perished due to exposure. That had always been the story. Nathan got hurt. Clara couldn't make it. But now we knew Nathan's body wasn't fresh, but it wasn't 10 years old either. Somewhere in between. And Clara, her fate had never been confirmed. Mason had given me a copy of the last journal entry my dad ever wrote. It had been transcribed from a notebook found at home. 2 days before they left, he'd written something about taking Clara to a ridge their mom used to hike, finishing a memory he'd called it. But that ridge wasn't on the permitted route. It was off-trail through rougher terrain. The next morning, I followed that path myself. Just after sunrise, I parked near the old trailhead, the one with a wooden fire warning post that hadn't been replaced in years. Most of the signs were new, trail closures, cleanup zones, but below them the carved post still stood. I ran my hand along it the way you do when something from childhood shows up in the wrong decade. And then I felt it grooves at the base. I crouched down and brushed away the dirt. It was a carving. A bird. Beak pointed upward, wings slightly open. The lines were shallow, worn by time, but they were familiar. Clara used to draw birds like that constantly. Warblers, robins. She'd doodle them on the backs of receipts on takeout napkins, even the corners of my notebooks. Dad once carved one into a stick just to make her laugh. I moved off the trail toward a large boulder pressed against the slope. Something at its base caught the light tucked into moss near a crevice. A small carved bird, no more than a few inches long, one wing chipped. It had been there a long time, but it hadn't been forgotten. I brought it into town. Griffith's General and Artisan, just west of the park boundary, was the kind of place that smelled like cedar and old varnish. Inside shelves were lined with bowls, spoons, walking sticks, and birds, dozens of them. I showed the carving to the man behind the counter. Older guy, white braid down his back, glasses smudged with dust. He turned it over in his hands, then tapped a notch beneath one wing. "That's mine," he said. "I made this about 10 years back. Used to supply the Trailhead gift shop with little pieces like these." I asked if he remembered who bought this one. His expression changed. Man came in, looked nervous, had a little girl with him. Blonde, about 6. She didn't say a word, just clutched that bird like it was the only thing she had. I asked when. He said it was right after the big storm that summer, 2 days after the official search began. "I called it in," he added. "Told the rangers I thought I saw them, and I asked. Nothing. No one ever followed up." Back at the station, I brought the carving to Mason. We pulled the old call logs together, flipping page by page. And there it was. August 7th. A tip from Lyle Griffith. Man and child matching the Holden case. Logged, flagged, reviewed, closed. No action taken. Mason looked at it for a long time. Could have been low priority, he said. Too much terrain, not enough proof. Or I said, someone didn't want to find her. He didn't argue. I stared at the line in the report, the one that let it all die on paper. The carving was still in my hand. That night back at the motel, I didn't sleep. I left the carving on the nightstand. It caught the moonlight in a way that made it look new again. Clara had been alive 2 days after the search began. That carving wasn't a memory. It was a message. And whoever closed that report all those years ago, they'd buried more than just a car. The next morning, I was back at the ranger station before the coffee had even finished brewing. Mason hadn't shown up yet, but Cora, the field assistant, was already in the tech room, hunched over a pile of cables and a heat-warped laptop. The bird carving was still in my jacket pocket, worn smooth from how often I'd been turning it over in my hand. When Mason came in, I showed him the call log again, pointed to the tip from Lyle Griffith and the scribbled note beside it. Reviewed closed. No action taken. He read it the same way I had. Slowly. Like the words weren't just ink on a page, but something heavier. Could have been a bad call, he said eventually. Maybe whoever logged it figured it was a case of mistaken identity. Or maybe there were just too many tips that day and not enough manpower. He said it like he wanted to believe it. I didn't respond. I was still looking at the warbler. It hadn't been carved for decoration. That bird had been something Clara carried, something she kept with her when the rest of the world vanished. I told him I wanted to search the area again, closer to the crash site, not just the tourist trails, the back routes, the ones that hadn't been open to the public in years. Mason looked at me hard for a moment, then nodded once. He assigned Cora to help. She didn't say much, just packed a light field kit and followed me out to the ridge by mid-morning. The burn scar was worse up close, ash still clinging to the roots, the air faintly sour with char. We walked slow, scanning the slope. That's when Cora crouched by something half-buried in soot and pine needles. It was the casing of an old trail camera, melted around the edges, one side cracked clean through. She flipped it over with a gloved hand, checked the slot beneath. "Card's still in there," she said. "Might be fried, but it's worth a look." Back at the station, she loaded the memory chip into a clean terminal. Mason joined us, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed while the images loaded one by one. Most of it was what you'd expect wind shadows animals passing through. Until about 40 minutes in. That's when a man stepped into frame. Heavy boots, flannel shirt tan from sun but worn at the collar. Broad shoulders. He was pulling a wagon behind him, wooden like something from an old farm, with what looked like camping supplies, jugs of water, a rolled-up tarp. A bolt-action rifle slung across his back. For 2 frames his face was clear. Then he vanished into the tree line. I asked Cora to zoom in. The resolution was poor, but you could make out the shape of his jaw, the scar near his mouth. Mason pushed off the wall and left the room. Came back a few minutes later with a folder from the old Ranger personnel files. He laid it flat on the table and pointed to the photo inside. "Calvin Rogg," he said. "Used to be a ranger out near Glacier Point. Got dismissed for behavioral issues. The photo wasn't recent, but it was him. Same scar, same build. He went off-grid after they let him go," Mason said. "Claimed the government was monitoring his calls. Reported one of his coworkers for being a spy. They found his storage unit full of dry goods, trail gear, fuel tanks. When they tried to bring him in for an evaluation, he was already gone. So he knew the park," I said. "Knew the shelters, the back trails. All of them." Mason opened an old park map and traced a line with his finger just past the spot where the camera had been mounted. Most of this area was closed after the landslides. Not many people would know how to get through anymore. But he would. I looked at the basin just beyond the tree line. "Did anyone ever search it?" "Not in years," he said. "Too unstable. No active trails. Wasn't part of the official grid." He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. If someone wanted to disappear, and if they didn't want to be found, that was the place to do it. And if Clara had survived the crash, if someone had dragged her from the wreck and taken her somewhere, they wouldn't have gone far. I stared at the image frozen on the screen. The man in the flannel. The wagon full of supplies. The date stamp just under a year after my family vanished. He'd been out there, moving through the park, hidden but not invisible. "What's out past that ridge?" I asked. Mason traced the line again. "Granite Ridge," he said. "Used to have a network of fire shelters. Old ones, before GPS. Some collapsed. Some were turned into storage. Most of them haven't been logged in years." I leaned closer. "That's where he went. That's where he took her." Mason didn't argue. He just folded the map and said we'd leave first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, turning the warbler over in my hands, until the light started to bleed through the blinds. By the time I reached the ranger station, Mason already had the truck loaded. Water, GPS, clipboard, plain clothes, no badge, no sirens. Just 2 men hiking toward a place most people had forgotten how to find. The terrain shifted fast, pine giving way to scrub oak, then back again. Burned logs crossed the path like bones. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. It wasn't long before we reached a ridge that sloped gently into a hollow. That's when I saw it. A cabin. Weathered. Sagging slightly to the left. Smoke drifted thin from the chimney. A pile of split wood leaned against the porch. There were no tire tracks, no generator hum. But it didn't look empty. We stayed back in the trees. Mason scanned it with binoculars. "Roofs patched in 3 places," he murmured. "No movement. But it's lived in." "You sure it's not on the map?" I asked. "Wasn't built by the Park Service," he said. "Probably by someone who didn't want it marked." We moved closer, slow, careful. When we were just at the edge of the clearing, Mason called out, voice even non-threatening. "Park Service, just here to check post-fire access. Anyone home?" A pause. Then a sound. Metal on metal. The distinct click of a rifle chambering a round. A man stepped out onto the porch. Tall. Wiry. His shirt, sun-bleached sleeves rolled. And in his arms that same bolt-action rifle held loose but deliberate. "What the hell do you want?" he barked. Mason didn't move. "Routine check," he said. "We're tracking containment edges, clearing structures." The man's eyes shifted to me. and him, I stepped forward slightly. "Just a volunteer," I said. "Mapping burn zones." His gaze stayed on me for another beat. Then he turned, muttering something low under his breath, and stepped back inside. The screen door slammed behind him, but just before it shut, my eyes caught something near the frame. A pair of boots. Small, neatly placed. Not dusty like everything else. They didn't belong to him, and they weren't abandoned. I didn't say anything right away. Neither did Mason. But when we got back to the truck, I leaned against the tailgate and stared at the trees. "You saw them, right?" I asked. Mason nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I saw them. She's in there." He didn't argue, but when he finally spoke, his voice was low and firm. "You can't go in alone. Not tonight. That man's unstable. If we rush this, we lose our shot." I nodded, but the thought of waiting even one more night, it didn't sit right. Not with Clara that close. Not with a pair of boots sitting clean on a stranger's floor. As the last light dropped below the trees, I made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was going back in, and this time I wasn't leaving without her. I waited until just after midnight, when the station was quiet and the hall light outside Mason's door had finally gone dark. I didn't take much, just a flashlight, a pocket knife, the carved warbler still in my jacket, and the trail map Mason had left folded beside the coffee machine. I didn't leave a note. I didn't think it would matter. The forest was different at night, quieter, heavier. There was no breeze, no animals stirring, just the faint crunch of ash and dried needles underfoot. The trail was harder to follow in the dark, but my body remembered enough. Every turn, every bend, the places where the slope dropped too fast or the brush narrowed too tight to pass without ducking. By the time I reached the ridge above the cabin, the porch light was out and the chimney had gone cold. I stayed low in the trees, circling toward the back where the windows were mostly boarded. One of them, a smaller pane near the back corner, had a cracked edge and a rusted latch. I moved slow, careful not to let the wood creak beneath me. My hands were sweating by the time I got the window open wide enough to slide one arm through. I was halfway in when something struck the side of my head. Not hard, not fast, just enough. Then everything went black. I came to slowly. My head throbbed, my vision patchy. I tried to move, but my shoulders pulled tight. My wrists were tied behind the back of a chair, rope rough and stiff with age. My ankles, too. The air in the room was cool, metallic, touched with the sour smell of rust and old fuel. There was no sound but the soft rasp of my own breathing. A sliver of light cut across the floorboards from a boarded-up window. The walls were unfinished. Tools, buckets, bundles of rope stacked haphazardly on shelves that hadn't been dusted in years. It wasn't a bedroom. It wasn't a cell, either. It felt like something in between. Someone else was in the room. Sitting on the floor across from me, knees pulled tight to her chest. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16. Her clothes hung loose at the seams, frayed at the cuffs. Her feet were bare. Hair, long, tangled, the color of dried wheat. Her arms were wrapped around her legs, and she stared straight ahead. Not at me. Just past me. I said her name quiet, almost like a test. Clara. She didn't move. But after a moment, her eyes flicked up. "No one calls me that," she said. Her voice was soft, even. "My name's Marie." I swallowed. My throat was dry, and every word felt like it caught before it cleared. "You're Clara Holden," I said. "You're my sister." She didn't react right away. Then she blinked slow, like the name was unfamiliar. "I don't have a brother." "You do," I told her. "My name's Aiden. You were 6 when you and Dad went on that camping trip. You had a yellow backpack with a robin stitched on it. You used to call warblers whistlebirds." That was when something in her changed. Her mouth opened just slightly. Her brow furrowed. "You had a butterfly net," I said. "You wouldn't go unless you could bring it." Still nothing. Then I added, You waved from the trailhead. Dad took a picture. You had a sun hat. You hated it, but you wore it anyway. Her hands moved slowly toward her mouth like they were trying to hold something in. A sound. A breath. A memory. I remember the net, she whispered. I nodded once, my voice steadied just enough. I found your carving, I said. The bird. Near the trail post. And Dad, she asked. The question came out so small it barely registered. Is he here? I looked down, then back at her. We found the car, I said. He was inside. He didn't make it. Her head shook fast at first, then slower. No, she said. No, he told me. Calvin said he said Dad drove away. He didn't want me. I leaned forward as far as the rope would let me. That's not true, Clara. He didn't leave you. He died trying to protect you. She sat very still. Her arms lowered. Her back curled in slightly like her chest had caved in. A sound came up from her throat, half sob, half gasp, and then she was crying. Not loud. Just broken. The kind of crying that doesn't make it to the surface right away. I didn't know, she said. I thought maybe. Some nights I saw him in dreams, but when I woke up it was gone again. You were just a kid, I said. It wasn't your fault. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her shirt. Her hands trembled. I took a breath. We're going to get out of here, I said. I promise. Then we heard the door. The sound of the knob turning slowly, metal against wood. She scrambled to her feet, brushing her sleeves across her cheeks. I straightened up, my hands still tied, every muscle on edge. Calvin Rogg stepped inside, ducking slightly beneath the frame. His face was hard to read. Not angry, just taut, suspicious, tired. He looked at Clara first. What were you talking about? Nothing, she said quickly. I heard voices. He turned to me. You lied to her, I said. You told her our father abandoned her. His eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. You took her, I said. You kept her here. You built a lie so tight she forgot who she was. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed the front of my jacket and yanked me forward. The chair screeched across the floor. Careful, he said, voice low. You think you understand anything? I found her. She was alone, scared, crying in the woods while the world forgot about her. You stole her, I said. His jaw clenched. One hand tightened. For a moment I thought he might hit me. But Clara stepped between us, arms out slightly. Please don't, she said. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt him. Her voice was different now, steadier. Raj's eyes flicked from her to me. His hand dropped. You were fine before he came, he muttered. You were safe. You were mine. She said nothing. Her shoulders lowered. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door. We heard the lock click into place. I sat back slowly. The chair creaked under my weight. Clara was still standing, her arms now wrapped around her ribs. Help's coming, I said. Mason's probably already on his way. She looked toward the window where the light had started to shift from gray to gold. He won't let me go, she said. Not now. Not with you here. I looked at her, held her gaze. He doesn't get to decide that anymore. Somewhere outside, the birds had started up again. Just a few. Low and scattered. But they were real. They were close. And someone would hear them. By mid-morning, the light in the room had shifted enough to trace the grain in the floorboards. Clara sat cross-legged in the corner now, her back pressed against the wall, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. She hadn't said much after the door locked, just nodded slowly when I told her help was coming. Every so often, she'd glance toward the boarded window like she was listening for something. I couldn't see the sky from where I was tied, but I could feel the air changing the weight of it. Somewhere out there, Mason had to know I hadn't come back. I figured I'd bought myself maybe a few hours before they came looking, if I was lucky. When the sound of a vehicle didn't come, I started watching the way the light moved across the floor. I counted the cracks in the wall, tracked the rhythm of her breathing. Then all at once the stillness broke. Footsteps, fast ones, moved through the other room. Then came the scrape of a duffel bag across the floor. Clara stood slowly, tense alert. The door opened, not as loud this time. Raj came in with the bag half-zipped and his rifle slung low across his back. His face was red, his mouth tight. He dropped the bag at Clara's feet and barked something I couldn't quite catch. She knelt and started packing. Dried food, matches, a flask, a roll of bandages. Her fingers trembled as she zipped it shut. "They'll come," Raj muttered, pacing behind her. "They always do. Just took longer this time." "You don't have to run," Clara said. Her voice was low, careful. "We can explain. They'll listen." "You didn't mean," he snapped, spinning toward her. "You think I'm walking into a trap after everything I've done to keep us safe?" He turned to me then. His eyes were wide, too bright. "You," he said, stepping closer. "You're the one who ruined it. 10 years clean, and now they're going to come crawling through every inch of that forest again." He reached for the rifle. "Should have ended it last night. One clean break." "Don't," Clara said. She stepped between us again, arms raised slightly. "Please. I packed like you said. I didn't run. I stayed." Raj stopped. His breathing was shallow, uneven. He stared at her, then looked toward the window. That's when we all heard it, just faint at first. Voices not clear, but steady. Then the low rise of a siren. It was still far, but getting closer. Raj's head snapped toward the door. "You brought them," he said. He grabbed Clara's arm, yanked her upright. "We're leaving. Now." "Let her go," I said. My voice was tight. "She's done with this." He didn't answer. Just grabbed the back of my collar and lifted me up, chair and all. I felt the legs scrape across the floor. He was stronger than he looked, but I knew he was starting to panic. You could see it in his shoulders, the way his grip shifted. Clara stumbled as he dragged us through the door and down the porch steps. The clearing outside had changed. There were officers now, 3, maybe 4. Mason stood at the front, weapon lowered but visible. The rest of the team fanned out behind him, positioned but not moving. Calvin, Raj, Mason called out, voice even. "Let them go." Raj pulled Clara close. One arm locked across her chest. The other, holding the rifle up, angled just enough that the barrel hovered near my jaw. "One more step," he shouted, and I put one in the boy's neck. The officers didn't move. Mason's tone didn't change. "They're not hostages, Calvin. They're victims. And this is your chance to end it." Raj's eyes darted between the trees. The trucks, the barrels pointed his way. I felt him shift his weight. He was going to run. Or shoot. Maybe both. I had one shot. I kicked backward hard, aiming for his shin. The chair legs cracked against him enough to knock him off balance. I threw my shoulder into his ribs and the rifle fired. Dirt sprayed near my foot. Then the two of us went down hard. Clara rolled free. The officers moved fast. I saw the darts hit him, one in the shoulder, one in the thigh. Raj tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He dropped face first into the pine needles and didn't get back up. Mason was the first to reach me. He cut the ropes with a hunting blade and helped me stand. My legs were shaky, hands almost numb, but I was up. "Clara," I said. I turned and saw her kneeling a few yards away, blanket already draped over her shoulders by one of the medics. Her face was pale, but she was steady. Her eyes found mine, and she didn't look away. "It's over," I said when I reached her. She didn't speak, just leaned forward slowly and let me wrap my arms around her. Her forehead pressed into my shoulder, and I felt the weight of the past 10 years settle between us, quiet, heavy, real. Raj didn't say a word as they loaded him into the ambulance. His eyes were open, but he looked past everyone. Not at us. Not at anyone. Just somewhere else. Maybe back into the woods. Clara and I sat on the tailgate of Mason's truck while the last of the officers cleared the scene. The sun was higher now, pressing through the smoke haze in long bands of gold. "You want to go to the hospital?" Mason asked gently. Clara shook her head. "I just want to leave. We'll get you checked out," Mason said. "Then we'll take you home." She looked up at me, almost afraid to say it. "Is it really over?" I nodded. The hard part is, she didn't cry. Not right then. Just sat still watching the trees move slowly in the breeze. I didn't know what she remembered yet. Not all of it. But I knew she remembered something. Enough. And whatever came next, we'd face it on our terms. Together. Later back at the station, Mason handed me a folder and a flash drive. "Drone controller," he said. "Pulled the logs from the last sweep near Granite Ridge. Some of it's corrupted, but you'll want to see what's there." I didn't open it right away. I just held it in my hand, thumb pressed against the corner of the label. A clue no one had noticed. Until now. I waited until I was alone. Clara had been taken to a safe evaluation unit an hour outside of Oakhurst somewhere with soft lighting and a door that locked from the inside. She didn't say much when she left. Just squeezed my hand and asked if I'd still be there when she got back. I told her I would. Meant it. But the truth was I hadn't stopped thinking about that flash drive Mason handed me. It stayed in my pocket all through the debrief and the hours of silent driving. By the time I got to my motel room, the sun was gone, and the sky was turning that deep steel blue that only happens right before everything goes pitch dark. I didn't turn on the overhead, just the lamp on the desk. I closed the blinds, slid the flash drive into my laptop. The folder had no name, just a string of numbers and dashes like it had been automatically generated. Inside were 6 files. 4 of them were blank. 1 was corrupted. Only 1 would open. It was video-grainy stuttering footage from the drone Mason's team had flown near Granite Ridge 2 days before they found the SUV. There wasn't much at first. Tree cover, blurred altitude data, the slow pan of a forest ravaged by heat and years of drought. But then, something. A clearing. The drone hovered for a moment, almost like it was recalibrating. Then it drifted left. Just off-center near the edge of the burn scar was a structure. Small, metal, mostly hidden by overgrowth and scorched pines. I paused the footage, leaned closer. It wasn't a cabin. It looked older, industrial, like it had been placed there for another purpose and never removed. I scrubbed forward. The drone rotated slowly around it. No smoke, no vehicles. But something in the way the roof was dented like it had been struck from inside stuck with me. I checked the metadata. Coordinates were partial, but enough to give me a fix. It was about 5 miles north of where we found Rod's shack. Off-trail. No ranger routes, no fire access roads. I zoomed in again and saw what I hadn't noticed before. Near the far side of the clearing, partially obscured by brush, was something white. Square edges. Sun-bleached. Not a tarp closer to a panel or box. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to see it. I didn't tell Mason, didn't check in with the station. I just packed what I needed, filled the tank, and took the service road until the gravel gave out. From there, it was a hike. 30 minutes in the air changed. Lighter but sharp smoke mixed with pine and something else I couldn't place. The ground underfoot had that unstable crunch like walking over broken tiles. Everything was brittle. The ridgeline came into view just before dusk. I could see the clearing now, smaller than it looked in the footage, but just as quiet. The structure was there, sheet metal, corrugated, streaked with soot. No lock on the door, just a rusted chain looped once through the handle. I pushed it open. It took both hands. The hinges screamed. Inside it was darker than I expected. Dust particles floated in the air, catching stray bits of light through a small hole in the roof. The walls were bare, no insulation, no markings, just an old metal desk, a cot frame, and a single chair tipped on its side. But on the floor, half tucked beneath the cot, was something square and red. A crate, wooden. The top was loose. I knelt down, pulled it toward me. Inside were 2 thick binders and a worn black pouch. I opened the first binder. Documents. Case notes, maybe. Field reports typed out in uneven font. Some pages had stamps on them, Forest Service, National Park Service. Others had been redacted in thick black lines. The second binder was worse. Photographs. Dozens of them. Most were time-stamped. All taken inside that shack we'd found Clara in. Some showed the room when it was empty. Others showed a girl, blurry, unmoving, sitting in the exact corner where I'd found her. One photo had a date on it that made my hands go cold. September 3rd, 2016. That was 4 years after they disappeared. It wasn't just that Raj had kept her hidden. He had documented it, filed it, like he was cataloging something. I picked up the pouch. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were 2 cassette tapes, labeled. One read, Subject 3A, 1108. The other had no date, just a name. Lucia. I stood there for a long time, tapes in hand, wondering if what I was holding was part of something bigger than Clara. Something longer. Something that had stretched back farther than anyone realized. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also couldn't ignore the other thing. The panel. The white box I'd seen in the drone footage. I stepped outside and started walking toward the far end of the clearing. The sun was low now. I had maybe 20 minutes of light left. I pushed through the brush. That's when I saw it. The corner of something plastic embedded in the dirt. I crouched down and started clearing away the pine needles. It was a hatch, white, labeled in faint lettering that had nearly worn away property of USFS. Do not disturb. I brushed more away and found the handle. Pulled. It didn't budge. I leaned my weight into it. Still nothing. That's when I realized it was sealed from the inside. I stepped back and looked around. No tracks, no signs of recent use. But the hatch wasn't old. The material was newer, heat-resistant, designed to last. I knelt again and knocked lightly. Just once. A low, hollow sound came back. I stood, heart thudding. That box hadn't been opened in a long time. But it wasn't empty. I backed away slowly, marked the spot with a strip of cloth from my pack. I didn't know what I was going to tell Mason yet. Didn't know if I was even supposed to know this place existed. But something had been hidden out here on federal land, buried beneath layers of official silence. And it wasn't just about my sister anymore. There were other names, other dates, other girls. One of them, apparently, was named Lucia. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I left the hatch alone and hiked back to the car before full dark. But the feeling of it, what was under it, stayed with me. When I got to the motel, I took a shower with the light off and just stood there while the water ran cold. I kept hearing that hollow knock I'd made on the lid. I'd only done it once. I didn't know why I expected something to answer. The next morning, I took the binders and tapes straight to Mason. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him where I'd found them, how I got there, what I saw. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I mentioned the hatch, he leaned back and pinched the bridge of his nose like he'd already known, or at least suspected. He asked if I'd opened it. I said no. He didn't ask why. I think we both understood what kind of line that would have crossed. It wasn't a civilian's place. It wasn't even really his. But we both knew we couldn't leave it buried. Within an hour, he had a federal liaison on the phone. I watched him pace that little room behind the station, quiet but firm, using phrases like unauthorized structure and historical contamination risk. It was code whatever this place was. It had roots. Old ones, possibly protected, possibly hidden. He hung up without saying much. Told me we'd head out the next day with a small team. No press, no local deputies, just 2 forest agents, a medical examiner, and Mason. I asked if Clara knew. He said not yet. That night I drove out to see her. It was quiet at the center long halls, soft lighting a front desk with a bowl of peppermints and a clipboard no one was looking at. She was sitting by a window, knees tucked up, sweater sleeves pulled down over her hands. She looked better. Not healed, not whole, but better. She smiled when she saw me, said she knew I'd come. We didn't talk about the hatch or the tapes. We just sat there staring out into the parking lot where the light buzzed faintly above the entrance. It was the first time I realized how long her hair had gotten, or how young she still looked even now. In the morning, we drove out. It was colder than before, the kind of dry cold that settles into your sleeves and doesn't leave. We parked a 1/4 mile out and hiked the rest on foot. Mason didn't talk much. The agents kept to themselves. The medical examiner, a woman named Hallis, was older. Quiet, careful. She kept her kit close. When we reached the clearing, everything looked the same. The shack, the overgrowth, the battered white lid set into the dirt like a forgotten puzzle piece. One of the agents crouched, ran a hand along the seal. "Magnetic," he said. "Vacuum locked. You'd need an internal override or an access rod." Mason didn't blink. He just handed him a thin metal tool with a curved tip. "Try this." It took a few tries. Then came the soft hiss of air, the seal breaking slowly, then all at once. The hatch lifted with a faint groan. Underneath was a square shaft about 3 feet across, descending into darkness. Rebar steps were set into one wall. You couldn't see the bottom from where we stood. Hallis clicked on a flashlight and went down first. The rest of us followed. The air shifted immediately, cooler, heavier, and thick with something I still can't name. The ladder led down maybe 15 feet, then opened into a narrow corridor. Concrete walls, low ceiling. The flashlight beams cut across rust stains, water damage, old mold lines. This place had been sealed for years, but it wasn't new. Far from it. At the end of the hall was a door, thick steel, chipped paint. One of the agents worked a second latch and pulled it open. Inside was a single room, bare walls, one cot, a bucket, no light fixtures, just a ventilation grate and a single mirror set high in the wall, too high for anyone lying down to reach. On the floor was a worn plastic wristband, yellow, faded letters printed across it. Subject 3A, RED. I didn't speak. None of us did. Hallis stepped forward, opened her case, and began the process: photos, measurements, swabs. But there were no remains. Just the outline of a place meant for containment. Not survival. Mason leaned in and examined the wall behind the cot. There were etchings marks scratched in with something sharp. Not words, not dates, just lines. Rows and rows of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Like someone had been counting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the second tape, the one with the name. Lucia. Mason looked at it for a long moment, then nodded. We left the room undisturbed, marked, logged, documented. The agent sealed the hatch again with federal tags and a sensor lock. It was no longer just a discovery, it was now evidence. Official. But I didn't feel any relief. Not yet. Clara was waiting when we returned. I hadn't planned to show her the photos, but she asked. She sat across from me, hands folded, face still. When she saw the marks on the wall, her breath caught. Then she said something I didn't expect. "There was another girl. I heard her once, through the grate. She said her name was Lucy." I didn't move. "You sure?" "Not at first. But I remember now." She paused. She asked if anyone knew where she was, if anyone was coming. "Did you answer?" I asked. Clara nodded slowly. I told her yes. I sat back, heart heavy. Did you ever hear her again? Clara looked away. No, she whispered. Not after that week. We didn't speak for a long time, just sat with it. The weight of what was lost, the silence of what had been kept hidden. And somewhere in that silence I knew this wasn't the end of the story. There were other rooms, other names, and one of them belonged to Lucia. The weeks after the hatch was opened moved slow, the kind of slow that seeps into your bones and leaves you uncertain if anything's actually changing. The federal team kept the site locked down. Mason had to surrender every bit of evidence, photos, tapes, binders into a system that made everything suddenly feel less personal, less under our control. Clara stayed at the trauma center. She saw a specialist twice a week. I visited her as often as I could, though sometimes all we did was sit side by side and let the silence hang. Some days she spoke more often she didn't. She was 16, but in the waiting room light she still looked so much like the little girl I'd lost. It was a kind of waiting neither of us understood, like the world was holding its breath until it decided whether to let us have closure or just more questions. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice finally began to move. Raj was transferred from the county jail to a federal facility out near Mendota. No chance of bail, no more hiding behind technicalities. The charges stacked up: abduction, unlawful imprisonment, homicide, obstruction. But the worst of it wasn't on the paperwork. It was what the prosecutor said to me when we met behind closed doors. He won't admit a thing she told me. He wants a trial. He wants an audience. The courtroom felt too bright, too official, like we were all playing parts someone else wrote. Raj sat with his attorney, looking smaller than he had in the woods, but no less certain. When the prosecutor made her opening statement, the room felt tight. I watched Clara from my spot in the gallery, her hands twisting a tissue until it nearly tore in two. She only looked at Raj once, and I watched her jaw set as if she could force him out of her memory if she just stared hard enough. The evidence was methodical. They laid out photos from the shack scans of the binder's audio snippets from one of the tapes. Not the ones with the girls' names, but another. A log Raj had kept narrating details about weather repairs, how to remain invisible. The defense tried to argue survivalism trauma, that Raj had been protecting Clara from a dangerous world. No one in that room believed it, least of all the jury. Then, on the third day, they called Clara to the stand. She stood shoulders straight, eyes steady, and answered every question about the day she was taken, about the years that followed, about the first time she realized what she'd been told wasn't true. She didn't cry, not while she spoke. She saved that for when she stepped down and let the advocate walk her back to her seat. Raj never looked at her. When the judge asked if he wanted to speak before sentencing, he did. He said he'd only ever tried to save her, that he had no regrets. The judge listened, face unreadable. Then she read the verdict: guilty on all counts. Life without parole. It was over in the legal sense. But nothing in me felt finished. That night, Mason and I sat on the bench outside the station. The air was thick with smoke from a controlled burn miles away, but it felt good to breathe it, to be outside. He handed me the warbler carving, the one I'd found on the ridge, the one Clara had once held like it was a promise. "She'll need this," he said. "Maybe you both will." Clara came home with us a few days later. She walked slower now, noticing every small thing, the brush of wind on her face, the way sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, even the sound of her own footsteps on the porch. She didn't talk about the trial. She barely mentioned Raj. But one afternoon, sitting on the back steps, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think he'll ever admit what he did?" I told her honestly, "I don't think it matters. We know the truth." She nodded. "I just want to stop dreaming about that place." I put my arm around her shoulders and let her lean in the way she used to do when she was little. Inside the house, Mom was cooking. The smell of onions and garlic filled the air, warm and safe. It didn't erase anything. but it gave us somewhere to start. There was still the matter of Lucia, of the tapes, of all the unanswered questions buried beneath official language and faded files. I didn't know if the government would ever let us know what happened to the other girls, but I made a promise to Clara and to myself that we wouldn't stop asking. Not now. Not when the truth was finally out in the open. As the sun set behind the pines, I watched Clara hold the warbler in her hands, turning it over and over, as if memorizing the shape of survival. And somewhere out there, past the last edge of the woods, there were other stories waiting to be found. The morning after the verdict, the air felt different, cleaner somehow, even though nothing in our lives would ever be the same. We took Clara home. There were no reporters waiting, no crowd, just us and the steady rhythm of the wind in the pines. The house was quieter than I remembered, sunlight drifting across the living room floor, cutting through years of absence and worry. Mom kept herself busy in the kitchen, her hands working without rest, as if she could keep time moving forward by never standing still. Clara wandered from room to room, pausing to run her fingers along the old picture frames to study the pencil marks on the door where Dad used to track our heights each year. There was comfort in those little things, signs that life had gone on even when it felt like the world had stopped. I thought when justice finally came there would be relief. But it was different, a kind of quiet acceptance, not peace exactly, but a settling of dust after a long storm. I found myself thinking back to the person I was before any of this started, the boy who let his family drive away without him, never knowing what it would cost. Guilt doesn't go away when the truth comes out. It just finds a place to rest somewhere in the back of your mind. Still being together, eating at the same table again, hearing Clara laugh softly at something Mom said that was a kind of healing I hadn't dared hope for. She moved slowly as if testing her footing in a world that hadn't felt safe for a long time. But every day she seemed a little lighter, a little more present. I think she was learning to trust the quiet again. We visited Dad's grave on a Saturday morning just after the fog had lifted. Clara brought the little warbler, carving the one she'd once clung to in the darkest times. She set it gently on the headstone and stood beside me, hands folded, eyes clear. We didn't speak for a while. We just listened to the wind and let the silence say what words couldn't. It's strange the things you remember, the last words you said, the promises you wish you'd made. Sometimes all you can do is keep showing up for the people who are left. The case against Raj is closed now. He's locked away, and there's a line in the file that calls it resolved. But what happened out there in the woods left more questions than answers about the other girls, about what gets overlooked when no one's watching, about how easy it is for a life to slip out of sight. I've learned that justice isn't tidy. It doesn't always heal the wounds it exposes. It just makes space for something new to grow. If you followed this story all the way to the end, I want to thank you. Not just for listening, but for remembering. Every time we speak these names, every time we hold on to the truth, we keep their stories alive. So if this stayed with you, I hope you'll share it so no one else gets lost in the quiet.